नो कृणन्दो अयमूर्त समूसर्दोस्तु तदेव नगरं सदिनं तदेव ताराबलं चन्द्रबलं तदेव विद्याबलं दैवबलं तदेव लक्ष्मीपदे तेक्रीं स्मरामि ओम भो ओम भुव ओम स्व ओम मह ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सदर्वणीयम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओम ज्योतिर्गमस्वराम ममोपात समस्त दुग्ध चैत्वारा परमेश्वर चित्तम कृष्य मानुष्य कर्मणः निर्वेगेन प्रसन्नतम माधव विघ्नेश्वर पूजा कर्ष्ये तृतीया मेर तुलसी सुरंदन कर्म देवता विस्मितिया त्रिदा लोकादितम विष्णुनाथुदा त्वं सतारिमं देवी पुत्रं मुरुदासनम आगमार्थं तु देवानं कमनार्थं तु रक्षार्थं खंडारवं कराम यादव देवदवाननाजनम ममोपात समस्त दुग्ध चैत्वारा परमेश्वर चित्तम निर्मलता सिद्ध्यर्थम माधव विघ्नेश्वर पूजा कर्ष्ये गणानाथा गणपतिकं भवामि कविं कवीनां सत्रवं ज्येष्ठराज ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पदे आनन्दमुसीदानम् अस्मिन् दर्शनबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः सूर्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः उपसारिकत्राणं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये स्नानानन्तरं स्मृतिं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदात्तम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः धन्ता धारयामि समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरिक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः अरण्यनाथम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः हरिद्राकुङ्कुमं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पैः पूजयामि ओम सुमुखाय नमः ओम एकदन्ताय नमः ओम कपिलाय नमः ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः ओम लंबोदराय नमः ओम विघटाय नमः ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः ओम विनायकाय नमः ओम धूमकेतवे नमः ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः ओम बालचंद्राय नमः ओम गजाननाय नमः ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः ओम ऐरम्बाय नमः ओम स्कंदमूर्जवाय नमः ओम सिद्धविनायकने नमः ओम शंकरमोक्षविनायकने नमः ओम आत्मपुरविनायकने नमः ओम महागणपतिये नमः नानाविध परिमलपत्र पुष्पाणि समर्पयामि धूपार्थं समर्पयामि धूपार्थं समर्पयामि दीपार्थं समर्पयामि अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवस्य सत्यं तद्देन प्रसीदामि अमृतं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा अपानाय स्वाहा ओम व्यानाय स्वाहा उदानाय स्वाहा समानाय स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः कुलकंठ गोशीरं निवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतं समर्पयामि कर्पूरं समर्पयामि समर्पयामि धीराजनं समर्पयामि धीराजनं ब्रह्मास्मि समर्पयामि वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा गणपति प्रसादं सुरसा गृह्णामि ओम भूः ओम शुभं भुवः ओम गण ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सोदरवणीयं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओम ज्योतिर्गमनं पुरुषराम ममोपात समस्त दुर्द चत्वारा परमेश्वर पिचेतम सुबह शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण तृतीय परार्थे श्रीवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरु दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगात्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रवासिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शोभकृतनाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने शरद ऋतु तुला मासे शुक्ल बच्चे अष्टमी तृतीयां शुभतिथौ भानुमास युक्तायां उत्तराषाढ़ नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां अष्टमी तृतीयां शुभतिथौ मम जन्मप्रति एतच्चन पर्यन्तं मध्ये संभावितानं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्यापननार्थम् अस्माहं सहकुर्माणं क्षेम सद्धर्य वीर्य विद्य आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्तमङ्गलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोषशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञान वैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तरंगं कलश पूजां च करिष्ये विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाधिश्च मूले तत्र सिद्धितो ब्रह्मा मातृपणे संकृता कुशं सागरा सर्वे सप्तसुधा सुंदरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो पतरण गंगे से संगम गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे शुद्ध कावेरी जले संगीतं गुरु अंगे से सहिता सर्वे कलशामृतमादिता आयान्तु देव पूजार्थं दुर्दशकारका संपूरा सागरोत्पन्न विष्णु करे देवेश पूजिते बलिये मंदिरे नमोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रोक्त जीवन दिवसनान अंजार निर्माल्यं स्वयं भवने पूजिये ओम सकलमनं शक्तियुक्ताय ओम पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिपुरुषाय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवभ्यो नमः दश दिक्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्येति प्राणविष्टामृतस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरः ऋषिरिके सामधर्मणि दत्तांसि सकल जगत स्थितिगति सम्मार्गारणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोमतिलकं प्राणविष्टाभ्यां योग आम कुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं गर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम कर्मविष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिम श्री स्वाहा क्रोम सिया आम कौसाय हरिम नेत्रदाय क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्ता बोधिस्त बोधोलिस्त तरुण स्वर कराप्ते पासम बोधन मिक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचमाना प्राण सुख वालम तनिवसिता पिनव सोलोटिया देवी वाला लोना बहुसुगरी प्राण शक्ति परान ओम हरिम क्रोम क्रोम हरिम अम्यम रमलम वंशम सम्म अंशस्वम स्वम वंश अस्यामुतो दीपदृष्टु अस्यामुतो सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाक्मनस्व सस्सोत्र जीव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपादि आयुष्टानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुखम श्रीम दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा वस्यसि प्राणपुष्टं तस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषि दिशा धर्मणि संतांसि सकल जगत स्थिति सम्मार्गार्णी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिम शक्ति लोकीलगम प्राणपुष्ट अपने योग आम पुष्टाभ्याम नमः हरिगर्जनीभ्याम नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्याम नमः आमनाभ्याम नमः हरिगर्जनीभ्याम नमः क्रोम कर्णपुष्टाभ्याम नमः आम गिर्याय नमः हरिम शक्ति स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसन् आम कौसायम हरिम नेत्रदाय वसन् क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध असुदीदे पुनस्मात् सक्सपुर प्राणवे रोहिते भोगम योगपस्ये सूर्यमेव मन्मुदेव सुति आवायुदो भव सद्दापिदो भव सन्नीदो भव सन्नीदो भव अवगुणितो भव सुब्रतो धन्नो सुब्रतो भव सुब्रतन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामी सर्व जगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन इन्देस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु ओम भूर्भुवस्वः सौदर्भवर्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो न प्रचोदयात् देवदत्त प्रचोदयात् ओम स्वाहा प्राणाय स्वाहा माने स्वाहा व्याने उदाने स्वाहा समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः कात्याय नमः मुरगाय नमः निदेवाय नमः सुब्रह्मण्य ओमिनादेवी नमः दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः नटराजा काल भैरवा नंदी महेश्वरा शिव पार्वती नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय नमः कुलगंध गोसीरम निवेद्यं समर्पयामि मते मते पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतं पुत्राभूषं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि यो I will recite Ramana Stotram. All of you can join. Sri Gurubhyo Namah, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Gurave Namah, Avara Sakti Sukvari, Rashorya Shorni Matram Bhuvanam Samastam, Guna Idamtam Brahman Gabiram, Jinta Virinam Virishitayami, Om Mahasena Mahusena Jataya Namah, Om Sri Ramanaya Namah, ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः ओम बहुजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत हितावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनाथास्तलोतिदाय नमः ओम पराशर गुणोत्तंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरात्मफलाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयायम्बा सयायवते नमः ओम शोणासुरमौलीन मानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तकाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशात्ममात्रे रक्तविद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्तिनिवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः ओम परमार्थविदे नमः ओम दिव्यराय नमः ओम पितृविदान्वेषणे नमः ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृविदे नमः ओम पितरादेष्ट सोणसैन प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तमोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम अहुसाय नमः ओम कुशाग्रतिये नमः ओम शांत संकल्प संप्रभाय नमः, ओम सुसुप्तसे नमः, ओम सवित्रे नमः, ओम स्थिराय नमः, ओम तपस्वीद सर्वंगाय नमः, ओम बुल्लाभुज विलोचनाय नमः, ओम चंद्रिका सुधासी पंडिताय मंडलाय नमः, ओम सूदवाट्याम समासीनाय नमः, ओम सूर्यदात्र विप्रमाय नमः, ओम वेद वेदांत तत्पज्ञाय नमः, ओम चिन्पुत्रुडे नमः, ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः, ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः, ओम विराजित सनाकृतिये नमः, ओम उद्दीप्तनयनाय नमः, ओम पूर्णाय नमः, ओम रसिदासुतांडवाय नमः, ओम गंभीराय नमः, ओम परमाचार्याय नमः, ओम सुप्रसन्याय नमः, ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः, ओम दक्षिणासीनिवाय नमः, ओम धीराय नमः, ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः, ओम स्वराजे नमः, ओम महर्षिये नमः, ओम भगवते नमः, ओम विद्याय नमः, ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः, ओम विमलाय नमः, ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः, ओम आप्ताय नमः, ओम रुजमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः, ओम सपत्रुसे नमः, ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः, ओम सत्याय नमः, ओम प्रशांताय नमः, ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः, ओम सुकुमाराय नमः, ओम सदानंदाय नमः, ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः, ओम दयार्णवाय नमः, ओम श्री सोनासुरयुत्पूतस्कन्दाश्रमनिकेतनाय नमः, ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टने नमः, ओम सद्भक्तवृत्तपरिवृताय नमः, ओम गणेश प्रीतिजय सेविता कृष्णोरुवाय नमः, ओम गीतोपदेश साराधिग्रंथ संसिद्ध संशयाय नमः, ओम वर्णासन मदातीताय नमः, ओम रसज्ञाय नमः, ओम सौम्याय नमः, ओम आत्मवदे नमः, ओम सर्वावनिष्ठारामाराध्याय नमः, ओम सर्वसद्गुणे नमः, ओम आत्मारामाय नमः, ओम महाभागाय नमः, ओम मातृमुक्तिविदायकाय नमः, ओम दीनदाय नमः, ओम दिनुदाय नमः, ओम दिप्राय नमः, ओम मुनिन्द्राय नमः, ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः, ओम दर्शनादक सम्मार्गे नमः, ओम मौर्य सत्प्रमोदकाय नमः, ओम मिर्चातिकरसानित्याय नमः, ओम स्फुटात्मतमोचकाय नमः, ओम दक्षिणजट्टाब्जवे नमः, ओम संसारात्मतारकाय नमः, ओम सोनादिष्टने नमः, ओम आर्तविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः, ओम अविच्छुदनीय प्रज्ञाय नमः, ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः, ओम कपटुलराय नमः, ओम सुप्रकविरवसनाय नमः, ओम गुहाय नमः, ओम दंडमाणिये नमः, ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः, ओम पौरवपिशक्पुराय नमः, ओम स्कंदाय नमः, ओम देवदमाय नमः, ओम अमर्त्याय नमः, ओम सेनानिये नमः, ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री हरनाथ श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री हरनाथ श्री रमणाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री हरनाथ श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय, 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 ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। Now let us all recite Budesha Saram. कर्तुराज्ञया प्रापदे फलं कर्मगिर्वरं कर्मधज्जनं प्रीति महतदो पदनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गगनिरोधकं ईश्वरार्पितं देचया कृतं चित्तशोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुत्तमं भोजनं व्यव चिन्तनं क्रम जगते सती दुग्ध सेवनम अष्टमूर्ति देव पूजनम उत्तमस्तव उच्चमंदन सिद्धजम जप ध्यानमुत्तमम् आचकारया क्रोधसातमम् सरलचिन्तनम् विरलनापरम् वेदभावना सौममित्यसौ भावना पिता भावनीमता भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुत्तम इष्टने मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगमो दार्शनिष्ठितम् आयुरोदन लीयते मन जालपक्षिव रोधसाधनम् सिद्धवायव सिद्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्मयी शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदं पुनर्भवति नो मृतम् प्राणवन्दना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नाशमेत्यद नष्टमानसो दृष्टयोगिन नित्यमस्ति स्वस्तिदं तद दृश्यवादितं चित्तमात्मन चित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं तु किं मार्गणे कृते नैव मानसं मार्गार्धवान् वृत्तयस्महं वृत्तिमाश्रिता वृत्तयो मनो विद्यहं मन अभयं कुतो भवति चिरवद ऐपदत्यं निजविचारणम् अहविनाशवात् अहमहं दया स्फुरधिरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अमिथ्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अप्यल्यसत्तया विग्रहे क्रिय प्राणदीगन नामसे कथं गच्छनं सतत सत्वगादिका चित्ववेदना श्रद्धया युक्ति सिद्धयाय ईशजीवयोर्वेषदीपिका सस्वभावनो वस्तु केवलं वेश आरद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनति ज्ञानमस्ति ज्ञानुमन्तरम् किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णनिःसुखम् बन्धमुख्यदिं तम्बरं सुखं विन्दतीयति अस्तु देविक आममेदकं निजविमानकं महति तं तमो रमणवागियं महति तं तमो रमणवागियं महति तं तमो रमणवागियम्.
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Ramana Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Raghavji. Raghavji shall be continuing his monthly sessions with us on Vichara Sangra or self-enquiry as preserved by Gambhiran Seshaya. As we all know, Vichara Sangra or self-enquiry consists of a series of questions posed by the devotee between 1900 and 1902 and handwritten answers by Bhagavan. The topics include both the core practices of self-enquiry as well as practices supportive or helpful for self-enquiry. Thus, the need for different for diverse types of spiritual aspirants are addressed by Bhagavan. Raghavji has been a long-time devotee of Bhagwan and a resident near the ashram in Thiruvannamalai. He has a deep background in Vedanta study under various acharyas of Rishikesh and Uttarkashi. After completing a degree in technology in 1993 and a few years of research in electronics, Raghavji was drawn to the exclusive pursuit of the path of self-inquiry. He was blessed to be closely associated with the Ramakrishna Mission, Arsha Vidya tradition, and the Adi Shankara Brahma Vidyapeeth. Since 2001, he divides his time between Uttar Kashi and Tiruvannamalai. He occasionally shares what he has learned from the acharyas with fellow devotees. I shall now request Raghavji to take over and address. Sir, over to you.
ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। वन्दे श्रीरमणश्रेः आचार्यस्य पदाब्जं यो मे दर्शयदीशं भान्तं ध्वान्तमतीत्य। Namaste and welcome to another session of the study of self-inquiry, which, as Anuragji pointed out, are some of the earliest instructions given by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi, and they were also written down. So we have very authentic records that these are the actual words of Sri Ramana Maharshi. And as we've been seeing, the questions here deal with Atma Vichara or self-inquiry, but also deal with many other topics related to, say, the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali, which was what we were discussing. So as we can see, Bhagavan also answers and validates questions related to these other paths based on the diverse types of aspirants who used to come to him. He would never invalidate or completely dismiss any path, knowing fully well that there are so many aspirants who would have to practice them and they would gain a lot of advantage by that practice so that it culminates in Atma Vichara or self-inquiry. So they are all preparatory. And in that sense, we were discussing the 27th question of self-inquiry or Vichara Sangraha, as it's called, the text, where the student asks, what are the 8 limbs of Patanjali? And Bhagavan beautifully answers and refers to the initial limbs and also reconciles these 8 limbs of Patanjali with the path of self-inquiry. Something that's very helpful for us today in the modern times, because the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali have their own appeal across cultures, across different countries, different students. And so as students of Bhagavan, as devotees of Bhagavan who are committed to the path of self-inquiry, to Nididhyasanam, it's very fruitful to see how we are to understand these 8 limbs of Patanjali as well. And in the last lecture, we looked at the initial limbs of the 8 limbs of Patanjali, namely Yama, Niyama, Asana, and Pranayama. And I also pointed out that Bhagavan gives a certain ratio there, referring to the traditional texts of 1:1, meaning 1 inhalation, 2 times or 2 units of retention and 2 units of exhalation. So typically you might say, let's say 4 seconds of inhalation, 8 seconds retention, and again 4 seconds exhalation. So Bhagavan points out this as a very good initial step in doing pranayama. And I also mentioned that the timing of these 3 phases of inhaling, and retaining and exhaling can be blended with a mantra. It's perfectly fine, because in as much as you might count, you might as well use a mantra. And so one chant you inhale, as you're chanting in your mind, you inhale. Then two chants within your mind, you retain the breath. And one chant, you exhale the breath. So this was Bhagavan's, you can say, recommended, if you like, ratio of inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation is called Puraka, and retention is called Kumbhaka, and exhalation is called Rechaka. And Bhagavan points out that the aim of pranayama is to discover a certain inner happiness, which makes you want to go forward, which makes you want to go on and on deeper into this path. And with that background, Bhagavan then moves on to the next of these 8 limbs of Patanjali called Pratyahara. And even for many who have some acquaintance with the 8 limbs of Patanjali, this limb is a little puzzling. Pratyahara. But if you were to look at it in the larger context of what is going on in and through these 8 limbs, building and culminating in the higher limbs of self-inquiry, as Bhagavan goes on to point out, Pratyahara is like the bridge between these outer limbs, so to speak, the Bahiranga sadhanas, as they're called, and the innermost or most advanced limbs of the 8 limbs of Patanjali. So, as we saw in the last talk, Yama, Niyama, Asana, and Pranayama are the first 4. And then you have the 5th one, Pratyahara, which is like the bridge between the earlier 4 and the last 3, namely Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. So Pratyahara itself is included in the outer sadhanas alone, formally, and the Antaranga sadhanas in these 8 limbs of Patanjali are only the last 3, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. But then, like I said, it is the culmination or the last of the initial 5 initial outer sadhanas. The word Pratyahara itself means moving away from the conventional preoccupations which the senses are subject to. So the senses have a property, an innate nature of going towards their objects. They are known as ahara in this context. Ahara means food. So each sense is like something that is seeking its food in the form of its respective sense object. And pratyahara implies that that sense is made to just come back, not rush towards its habitual preoccupation with its object. While this might seem abstract, all you have to do is just make a small note of when you have, let's say, a little free time, just a minute of, let us say, pause between the various things you're doing during the day, and see how your hand might reach out to pick up the mobile phone and start browsing pretty much unproductively. If you were to just restrain that tendency, take a moment to pause and recognize how almost by a kind of addiction, by a kind of habit, we are rushing to pick up that mobile phone and getting absorbed in something or the other. We have our own rationale, our own justification to explain why we are doing that, but it is compulsive. It's almost like an addiction. So that, when you try to restrain it, is pratyahara. You're preventing the senses from just rushing forward to their preoccupation. Similarly, if you're prone to, let's say, eat impulsively, just take a little pause there. Maybe eventually you get around to eating that very thing which you are trying to get a little hold over, doesn't matter, but at least you have taken that little pause, bringing in that little extra awareness there. In the earlier example, if you still have to use the phone, Pretty much you can do it, but do so after just a little pause there, maybe a minute. Just give it a go, give it a little space to see, do I need to use this phone right now? Do I need to communicate something important to someone? Well, for sure, go ahead. Or am I just trying to check on something pretty unproductive? What's going on in the news? Or are there any new messages for me? So that would be more like a non urgent kind of an activity. So you introduce a little pause between what you compulsively do and what you really need to do. Similarly, with the food, you're, let's say, prone to just impulsively eat. Just grab some easily available food just to, satisfy some inner neurosis or inner mental restlessness. Comfort foods is the word they use sometimes these days. So something that makes you feel good. Well, let it make you feel good, but just give that little extra pause. Just a minute, hold back, pull back, and just become aware of the state of your mind when it is seeking that absorption in something external to itself, when it is seeking an escape from that vacuum that you are right now with. So that's all included in this word pratyahara. So you introduce that extra awareness into any of these kind of compulsive habits. And Bhagavan also gives some specific methods involving pratyahara. But like I said, the very word means prati, reverting, reversing the direction, and ahara, food. So you reverse the direction of the mind and the senses from getting absorbed unawarefully, habitually, compulsively in their food, which is the objects or some habits you are prone to get into. In many ways, all of us have this comfort zone where we are disinclined really to do any stronger or more intense kind of an effort or put more energy into what we really feel meaningful, like a sadhana we define in our own way. In other words, we have our own routine and we just keep going through that over and over again. And we always might feel, oh, I don't have time for anything, more for self-inquiry or anything I really love, but I don't have time to do that. Well, that's not really a valid kind of an excuse, but nevertheless, this step called pratyahara kind of accommodates that very natural human need or a human tendency to go on repeating those habits and patterns. And so one way of pratyahara is you kind of challenge yourself by changing that very environment. So if you're, let's say, always in a certain work routine, well, try to take some time off once in a way. Spend a few days totally away from their environment and maybe come to Ramanashramam or come to any other, center where you're not too much, out of place and you feel comfortable. So that change of place too can help you summon up this practice of pratyahara. So like I said, look at these 2 or 3 things I mentioned. Just pause before you habitually do something you're accustomed to doing, whether it be eating or use of mobile phone. Become aware of the inner state of mind. See why or what is causing you to pick up that phone, to eat that food. Is it to fill a vacuum inside? Is it to escape from just facing the reality of what I am in this moment? Well, then we can as well face it, because all our acharyas are assuring us that even in facing that present moment reality, we will discover a lot of freedom. There is no need to fear that vacuum, that space which we might face when there's nothing else to do. And so pratyahara is that space you're trying to create without escaping into some or the other pursuit. Then again, I also said that when you try to change the place, another, excuse me, another kind of way you can try to just take a step back from your habitual pursuits and habitual tendencies of doing or experiencing certain things in your regular life. And so, like I said, this is an important bridge between the outer sadhanas involving more external practices, bahiranga sadhanas. When you do the third of these 8 limbs of Patanjali, asana, well, you have to move the body awarefully, alertly. In a way, even asana done with a lot of awareness of breath and so on becomes a meditation. But for now, let's look at asana at a first level of analysis, and let's place it as something that involves the physical body. Pranayama, it involves the prana body, involves playing with the breath in some very alert ways, doing the pranayamas. And then you are coming to more subtle practice, which is the practice of pratyahara, where for the first time you're just sitting still virtually, doing nothing much really. So pratyahara in that sense doesn't really ask you to do something externally, but just become aware that, hey, I am just getting carried away by something or the other every moment of my life. So you become aware of that. And then Patanjali Maharshi says that just as a queen bee, when it leaves a hive for various reasons, all the worker bees go after the queen bee. The queen bee is a leader. So if there's a beehive and every beehive has a queen bee, Patanjali says that that queen bee, when it leaves and goes off to either build another nest or to escape, let's say, some calamity, then all the worker bees, all the drones, they just go after the queen bee. They follow the leader. So even here, even so, in Pratyahara, when I turn away my attention from all these habitual pursuits, where I'm just getting absorbed in something or the other, I kind of just pull back and turn my attention to something else, then automatically all the other senses too get gathered in. So I don't have to individually work with the different senses and so on. All I have to do is pick up another object to just gently turn my attention. That's like the queen bee. So your attention therefore pulls in all the other senses. That's the message here of Pratyahara. And Bhagavan too gives us some additional very interesting methods of Pratyahara. We will read that here. This is question 27 of the Vichara Sangraha. Pratyahara is regulating the mind by preventing it from flowing towards the external names and forms. The mind, which had till then been distracted, now becomes controlled. The aids in this respect are meditation on the pranava. Pranava means omkara. Fixing the attention between the eyebrows, looking at the tip of the nose, and reflection on the nada. The mind that has thus become one-pointed will be fit to stay in one place. And after this, dharana should be practiced, which is the next step after pratyahara. So Bhagavan gives these methods that even meditation on pranava is also helpful for pratyahara. So when we see the flow of these 8 limbs, given that the later steps of dharana and dhyana involve more and more inner practices related to the mind, the meditation on the pranava for sure can involve chanting of the pranava outward. That too is very helpful. So if there is no other particular mantra that kind of attracts you or you're not already doing, then for sure, just chanting the omkara, saying om with elongated om is very helpful. And it's like the bridge between these outer sadhanas and the inner practices of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So meditation on the pranava. And then fixing the attention between the eyebrows or the tip of the nose and reflection on the nada. So particularly we can see how the reflection on the nada implies that you are turning your attention to a certain sound which may be heard even outwardly. This word nada is often associated with many esoteric, connotations, which is fine. But for now, let's keep it very clear, rational. So start with the use of the word nada as sound which you either chant or hear. Just start with that. instead of jumping to a very mysterious, esoteric meaning of the word nada. So you could start, like I said, paying attention to sound. That sound can be something you chant, like the Omkara, or something that you even have going in the background if you're comfortable with that. So both have their benefits. When you chant, you have greater capacity to rein in the emotions. Like I said, the energy that your mind is investing in some, worry, tension, stress, the chant will absorb that when you chant aloud, especially. So chanting aloud is very helpful if you find your mind is especially unruly and all kinds of thoughts and repeated emotive patterns are coming in. So I'm going on worrying about something, then do external aloud chanting. As some of you may know, in the Upadesha Saram, the 3 steps of chanting are described. Uttamastavad Uchamandataha Chittadanjapa Dhyanamuttamam. Uttamastavad means more than chanting aloud, such as even the Vedic mantras. Uttamastavad Uchamandataha. Gradually you make it softer and softer, but start with chanting aloud, okay? Then you can just chant Upamshu, just chant softly, barely audibly. And then even finer, you just chant in your mind. These 3 stages of chanting in the map of Patanjali can be placed approximately at the Pratyahara level because you're chanting aloud. As you start making the chanting very subtle, if you follow this particular path, then it becomes more related to dhyana. But we'll come to that later. So for now, we are referring to use of sound as a very effective tool to quieten the mind, especially when there are unwelcome emotions. It's incredibly helpful to do that. Chanting Omkara with elongation of the vowel. How does that sound? It will sound like a regular Om, which is 3 matras long, which is 3 durations of time. When you chant the elongated Om, it might be maybe 12 units of time. For example, as you inhale and chant elongating the Om, notice how in this chant, it was first longer, it was loud and audible, and there was stress on the makara, okay? Even the nasal sound, the M sound, ma, too wasn't underplayed, okay? You clearly pronounced the ma also. Those are the 3 features of this Dirgha Pranava chanting, which is pretty much given a good place in many of the traditional texts. Even the Vedantic texts, such as the Panchadashi, mention that the Dirgha Pranava is very helpful to control a restless mind. And so Bhagavan here, therefore, validates that practice, saying that meditation on the Pranava and also reflection on the Nada. So these are both very interrelated. The word Nada refers both to the chanting as well as the silence at the end of the chant, as he makes clear later on. So we have in the chant of Omkara, we have O, A, U, and Ma. That means the starting of the Omkara comes from deeper in the belly, closer to the A. And then as you blend it into the nasal sound, you have Om. Okay. So don't say it as Aum. One of the wrong ways of chanting is saying it as Aum, as in A, U, and M. So in your mind, you of course understand the existence of A, U, and M. A, U, M is equal to Om. But when you actually chant it, you blend it and chant. Don't chant it Aum. So many, let's say, techniques, sometimes they're doing it that way, which is incorrect as per the traditional Shastra. You just say Om only. You don't say Aum, just for the record. And in your understanding, though, you recognize that when you chant Om. Initially, the sound is deeper in the belly. So you make it a little lower in pitch if you can, the better. And then as you chant, the sound, as it were, reaches the throat and emerges out. And then as you close the lips to make the nasal sound, there's a humming sound, right? Even that is very helpful. So if you pay attention to this entire chanting of Om, very helpful for preparing for Atma Vichara. Remember, all these methods and techniques are with the intention of making us relate to Atma Vichara, which is the Sakshat Sadhana, which is the direct means to arrive at self knowledge, or to arrive at the self as non-dual, as free from all suffering and free from all falsehood. So before that, therefore, this Om chanting is an excellent preparatory practice. Bhagavan has placed it in the category of Pratyahara. The mind that has thus become one-pointed will be fit to stay in one place. After this, dharana should be practiced. What is dharana? That is the sixth of the 8 limbs. And remember, now we have moved into what are known as the antaranga sadhanas of the 8 limbs, the inner practices of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. So in dharana, Bhagavan says, this is fixing the mind in a locus which is fit for meditation. So Patanjali says, Desha bandhaha chittasya dharana. So you fix the mind at a certain physical location or a loci or a locus, as Bhagavan has said. So in the tradition, Patanjali himself refers to loci such as the heart center or the nabhi, which is the navel, or the throat, or the brahmarandra, which is the top of the forehead, or the top of the skull rather. So all these places are helpful in that they purify the nadis, they direct your attention in a very helpful way. And Bhagavan therefore validates those particular centers for meditation and adds something more there. So remember these 4 popular centers, which is the navel center, the throat center, and the heart center, and then the throat center, then the center between the eyebrows, and then the sahasrara, which is the center at the fontanelle, what's called the fontanelle, which is where a newly born baby has a soft kind of a part in the skull, the uppermost part, that is called the fontanelle. In yogic parlance, that is called the brahmarandra. So Bhagavan then says the loci that are eminently fit for meditation are the heart and the brahmarandra. So these 2 are amongst all the best. The heart center and the brahmarandra, the aperture in the crown of the head. One should think that in the middle of the 8-petal lotus that is at this place, there shines like a flame the deity, which is the self, that is Brahman, and fix the mind therein. After this, one should meditate. So Bhagavan is just giving for our benefit an example of an upasana here, of a visualization. What is upasana? A certain visualization of these centers as having an 8-petaled lotus in the Brahmarandra. And then there shines like a flame the deity, which is the self, that is Brahman, and fix the mind therein. So one visualizes a luminous space in the heart center or at the Brahmarandra, and there one should meditate on that luminous space in one of these 2 centers. Again, purely given as per the Upanishad, Angushtamatra Purushaha, that there is a luminous being who is, as it were, compared to the thumb. The thumb there denotes something else as well. It denotes the key finger. You have many fingers, but the thumb is the most important one. So the Angushtamatra Purushaha mentioned in the Kathopanishad refers to the key person around whom everything is centered, like the hub of a wheel. So even so, there is another meaning too, that it's a small luminous space in the heart where you visualize that existence of the being, which is you, which is the conscious being. You meditate that I am there. So like I said, all this is in the way of upasana. Upasana, remember, is a very creative visualization which is helpful. All this is one step short or before Atma Vichara. Now, the next step is called dhyana, the most popular word, a catch-all word normally translated as meditation. So in Patanjali's model, dhyana is very clearly defined. Dhyana is defined as repeating the same thought again and again. So when you repeat a thought awarefully with effort, that is called dhyana. And when those thoughts are directed in a certain way prescribed by the gurus, then it has some very helpful effects. So that's what this whole method is about. Remember, it's not uh, related to things which are today called meditation, where everything is called meditation today. I remember an interesting incident where I visited a professor of mine who was a Gandhian person. He was an engineering college professor, very senior person. Then he went on to become the vice chancellor in a university in central India. And he mentioned that, Raghav, I have designed this whole campus by meditation. And then I thought, oh, is he doing meditation? Is he practicing meditation? And then after a few more, minutes of conversation, I realized he just meant meditation as in closing his eyes and thinking about things and visualizing, okay, let's have the hall here, let's have the conference room here, and let's have a two-story building and so on. So he's just visualizing all of this. He uses the word meditation. That's how normally the word meditation is used. Many of us today who are familiar with Bhagavan and with some of the spiritual literature, we forget that the word meditation was used in a different way earlier. Now we are adopting that word and giving it a new meaning. So it's fruitful to remember that the word meditation implies just thinking about certain things. But here in Patanjali's method, the word meditation is something very specific. Pratyaya ekatanata dhyanam. So when you're repeating the same thought over and over again with effort, that is called meditation. And the more successfully you do it, the more there is continuity in that pratyaya or thought. Pratyaya means thought, ekatanata means oneness. So the pratyaya which follows is the same as the pratyaya which is there right now. So if you say at this moment there is one pratyaya means thought, the next moment to the same pratyaya repeats. That is meditation. Clear, simple definition of Patanjali. So you can now see or map the methods of what are known as meditation today, whether it matches with this or not. Okay, so Bhagavan says here, this is meditation, dhyanam, through the I am he thought, that one is not different from the nature of the aforesaid flame. Even thus, if one makes the inquiry, who am I? Then, as the scripture declares, the Brahman which is everywhere shines in the heart as the self. That is the witness of the intellect. One would realize that is the divine self that shines in the heart as I. This mode of reflection is the best meditation. So it's quite a compact paragraph, and we will slowly unfold that. So, like I said, remember, meditation is repetition of a thought with effort. So remember the two aspects there. Repetition is there and effort is also there. So dhyana cannot be done without effort. If it is effortless and the thought is repeating itself, it's the next step. It's called samadhi. Okay, effortless abidance in the thought. That is called samadhi. We'll come to that later. But for now, it's like you are making an effort to repeat the thought. That is dhyana. So Bhagavan nicely maps the traditional use of this word dhyana onto self-inquiry. So that's where it's very interesting, also important for those who are practicing self-inquiry here. So Bhagavan says that one could view this step dhyana as repetition of the thought that I am that. That meaning that consciousness, which is all that exists. So this presupposes a lot of understanding, a lot of background. How can all this be consciousness? So that needs some Shravanam, that means a lot of prior exposure to the Shastra, to Bhagavan's own words. When Bhagavan says in the Upadesha Saram, he says, Isha Jivayor Veshadhibida Satsvabhavato Vastu Kevalam Veshahanataha Swatma Darshanam Isha Darshanam Swatma Rupataha. The whole of the Vedantic Mahavakya is there in those two verses there. Isha Jivayoho, between the individual Jiva and Isha, the cause of the universe. Isha Jivayor Veshadhibida. The difference is only Vesha, it's only an Upadhi, it's incidental. You, as the individual consciousness, and he, which is universal, also consciousness, are the same consciousness when you remove the Vesha of individual and total. When those Veshas, the Upadhis, are negated by understanding that they are not really absolute, they're not really there at all if we look at them. When you look at consciousness as it is, there are no upadhis, there are no descriptors, there are no adjectives. Consciousness is what it is, I am. In this way, Bhagavan has explained so well and beautifully in the Upadesha Saram that this individual person you experience every moment as I am is not limited. It is not something that you locate in the body. You might do that by habit, but if you challenge yourself, you will find all that exists is in awareness, in consciousness. All that exists will resolves in consciousness, even every day at night when you go back to bed, when you sleep. So from consciousness, all this arises, and into consciousness, all this subsides. Every day, this keeps happening. And so all this talk of God, universal consciousness, all of that again is nothing but another Vesha of consciousness alone. In this way, when we keep highlighting the truth that consciousness alone is the reality, everything else is superimposed like waves in the ocean, keep arising and falling in that consciousness, which is I am, which is ever evident, which is not something that you need to experience afresh. You're already experiencing it from moment to moment. In this way, when you shift your attention from the content, from experiencing various things, the very fact that I am experiencing, when you shift your attention to that, you come back to that I am he thought. So what is the I am he thought? Recognizing that I am, which is consciousness, is all that exists. There is no secondary equivalent or counterpart to consciousness. There are no two consciousnesses. Even in English, we don't have a plural for the word consciousness. Something very wonderful, really. Thanks to the language here, that it's good we don't have a plural for that. By sheer accident, perhaps, we just have one word, consciousness. And so there is just one consciousness, which is all this and also what I am. That recognition in the form of a single thought, if you're able to understand, appreciate, highlight that thought, that's the I am he thought. So Bhagavan says, through the I am he thought, that one is not different from the nature of the aforesaid flame. What is that flame talked of? So in the previous shloka, in the previous paragraph, Bhagavan has explained that there is this luminous space where I feel I reside, and that alone is of the very nature of consciousness. By meditating on that, you understand it's not some point in the body. In fact, all that you call body and mind are in awareness consciousness. Awareness and consciousness are just synonyms here. So when you recognize that, you recognize, therefore, I am all that exists. I am is the reality that alone really is there. That very thought, when it is repeated, is Bhagavan's definition of meditation. The repetition of the I am he thought is what even in the Upadesha Saram Bhagavan calls it Abhida Bhakti. Abhida Bhakti, he says that when the non-dual meditation is followed for a length of time, you get to the highest abidance. So we'll see that a little later. But for now, let's finish this unfoldment of dhyana as per Bhagavan. He therefore goes on to mention that even thus, if one makes the inquiry, who am I? So he is defining this itself as the inquiry. When you repeat the thought, I am he, again and again, Bhagavan says this is one type of who am I inquiry. Okay? Later on, in other contexts, Bhagavan has shown who am I as not even repeating a thought. It is pure abidance as I am. But for now, we go along with this because Bhagavan is fashioning these methods in keeping with the student in front of him. And so, but if one makes this inquiry, who am I, in this way, in other words, then as the scripture declares, that Brahman which is everywhere shines in the heart as a self, that is the witness of the intellect. One would realize that is the divine self that shines in the heart as I. This mode of reflection is the best meditation. And so, for those of you who are familiar with Bhagavan, you can remember the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali can be mapped onto who am I path in the way Bhagavan has described here by looking at dhyana as repetition of the thought I am he. But to repeat that thought, to have the correct vritti, the correct thought for I am he, requires background of what Bhagavan has said in so many contexts. It cannot be just used as a technique. So that's what you have to remember. Who am I is not another technique. There are so many techniques floating around. Do this and do that. Well, this is not another simple technique. It requires the whole teaching of Bhagavan in a capsule form. When you say I am he, the entire teaching of the Guru, of Bhagavan, of the Shastra is being evoked and highlighted. And so that thought, when it is repeated, leads to the goal here, which is what Bhagavan says, discovering and appreciating the self as limitless Brahman. And this alone leads to the next, the eighth limb of Patanjali, Samadhi. As a result of the fruition of the aforesaid meditation, the mind gets resolved in the object of meditation without harboring the ideas, I am such and such, I am doing this and this. And this subtle state in which even the thought I disappears is called samadhi. So the thought disappears, I don't disappear, the thought alone disappears. If one practices this every day, seeing to it that sleep does not supervene, God will soon confer on one the supreme state of quiescence of mind. And so this is the culmination of the eight limbs when we see them through the lens of Atma Vichara. So in the seventh and eighth are the key steps there, that you arrive at this thought of I am he, and then effortlessly glide into samadhi, where that thought repeats itself without too much of push from your side. You're not trying to continuously do something. You're not trying to develop another identity there. Oh, I am the meditator. Even that I am the meditator bhavana, even that feeling kind of resolves. When that happens, you get a glimpse of this samadhi. If this seems something beyond me, well, for sure, every night you're most willingly doing that very resolution of mind, but a little unawarefully. Remember, whenever you hear the word samadhi, do not assume that it is something out there and form some imagination, some concept about it. It's exactly what's happening every day, except that there is tamas. Okay? There's an upadhi of tamas there, which is why you don't wake up enlightened, for sure. But nevertheless, it's not entirely outside your experience either. And there were no objects, and I was very blissful. That is the important thing to note there, that you don't need objects to be happy. That's the lesson that Sushupti, deep sleep, is teaching us. So, and therefore, when it comes to samadhi, therefore, it only implies that that same I am he vritti or thought becomes a little effortless. So you're not trying to continuously maintain the thought or vritti. Instead, it kind of goes on autopilot or like cruise control. You have this word, right? Most cars nowadays come with this feature, cruise control. So you kind of take your leg off the pedal, but the car continues to move at a certain speed. So in dhyana, when your foot is on the accelerator, you're making the effort. Then you put the mind in cruise control. You take your leg off the pedal, the mind continues according to, you can say, the law of motion, the Newton's first law of motion, that an object, when it starts moving in a certain direction, continues to move like that unless acted upon by an external force. Well, Patanjali says even the mind has that property. Samadhi chittasya sarvabhauma lakshanaha. in one of the beautiful commentaries on the Yoga Sutras called the Vyasa Bhashya, it is mentioned that the tendency of the mind to just effortlessly glide in a vritti is natural to the mind, but you need to tap into that. So here, therefore, if you were to glide into that I am he vritti, allowing it to continue, if you are having the grace of the Guru and that happens, that is the glimpse or the practice of samadhi. And by and by, that practice becomes natural to you, whether you're sitting or standing or doing other activities. And then Bhagavan calls it Sahaja Samadhi. So that's still later, not mentioned here, but Bhagavan in other contexts mentions that when this spontaneous or natural abidance as I am he becomes effortless, continuous when you're sitting, meditating or not, that is Sahaja Samadhi. That's what is the ultimate goal here. And so by this practice and making sure sleep does not supervene, the reason why Bhagavan mentions sleep is it's very close to samadhi. Okay, sleep and samadhi look very similar, and the only difference is the upadhi or the guna. Sleep has more of tamas, a certain inertia there, and the awareful practice of I am he or the Vedantic vrittis has sattva in it. Those vrittis are sattvika. Otherwise, they're similar. So one tends to get into sleep unawarely. What happens if that happens? Well, don't blame yourself because that becomes another vritti. Do not condemn yourself. That becomes an addition to the avidya. Instead, gently wake yourself up and resume the meditation. Because that only shows your mind has relaxed and you have nodded into some kind of sleep, which is fine. I already mentioned this in other contexts that whenever sleep comes upon you in any kind of meditation, do not blame yourself. That's a sign you have attained some depth, some kind of inner relaxation. Resume it when you wake up, it will be very deep. So do not lose that opportunity. When you get out of that sleepy, drowsy state, there are those few moments when your restless mind has not yet woken up, but you are alert. So utilize that small junction between sleep and waking, which especially comes upon you if you try to meditate for a little while in a relaxed, gentle way. So don't blame yourself for the sleep which might supervene, as Bhagavan puts it, during meditation. As you wake up from that sleep, use the opportunity to just be quiet, observe yourself, observe the thoughts, be with what is at that time. And so this completes these 8 limbs of Patanjali described here. So, like I said, Bhagavan's self-inquiry is mapped, meaning it is reconciled with these 8 limbs. It's very tricky, but Bhagavan very beautifully does that, never swerving from the goal or from what Bhagavan is 100% committed to communicate out of compassion for the disciple. For those of you who are curious about this, I might mention that the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which mention these 8 limbs, are inherently dualistic, which means they stop with the idea that I am different from the mind. I is Purusha and mind becomes resolved or understood as Prakriti. Okay, Purusha and Prakriti. That duality remains in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra philosophy or darshana. This doesn't mean Patanjali was not enlightened, because he might have written many other books too. He has written a great Mahabhashya on grammar, for example. So we don't know what all Patanjali has written. He might have been a great Advaitic teacher, but when it comes to the Yoga Sutras, he has restricted himself and specialized, so to speak. How do you separate the mind from yourself from involving with the mind? So that is his topic there. So he has defined yoga as chitta vritti nirodha. So he wants to separate himself, the Purusha or I, from the mind into which it is involved, with which it is tied up, entangled. So he doesn't go all the way in the Yoga Sutras itself to Advaita. Okay. So just for the record, the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali is one step short of Advaita, but it's still extremely precious and a very valuable treatise telling us all the steps in the journey towards enlightenment. So it is well accepted and respected as an important practice in self-inquiry in Vedanta. But remember, for the record though, there is no Advaita fully explained in that, because that's not the subject matter there. It's not a defect of the text. It's just the content specializes on recognizing I am as Purusha separate from the mind or Prakriti. But then that's what Bhagavan's teaching says here, that when that I am is thus understood as separate from the mind, it is discovered in the light of the teaching of the Guru. Remember, where does it come from? The scripture declares that Brahman, which is everywhere, shines in the heart as the self, which is the witness of the intellect. So that teaching is what we need to bring in there. Patanjali doesn't talk about that. Bhagavan fills in that, if you like, gap there by saying that the scripture declares, scripture here is coming to us through Bhagavan only, that Brahman, which is everywhere, shines in the heart. So if this teaching is there, then you get Advaita. Without the teaching, you stop with the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. I am different from the mind. Till there, the Yoga Sutras take us. So that's why Bhagavan has adapted, if you like, the Yoga Sutras or the Patanjali's 8 limbs into Atma Vichara by introducing this beautiful, precious teaching that the self alone is Brahman. That is the teaching here. Okay, we will now just read the 28th question, and then maybe we will continue in the next class after we see a little bit of the answer. Disciple, what is the purport of the teaching that in Pratyahara one should meditate on the Pranava? So they had presumably had some conversations going there, that in Pratyahara, which is the 5th of the 8 limbs, Bhagavan had mentioned meditate on the Pranava. Like I mentioned, the elongated Om, you can meditate on that. So why do you want to do that? How does it help us? The disciple wants some more elaboration there. And Bhagavan goes on to explain that the purport of prescribing meditation on the Pranava is this. The Pranava is Omkara, consisting of 3.5 matras, A, U, M, and Ardhamatra. So what this means is that when you think of Om, in your mind, you should remember what I mentioned earlier. The origin of the Om is from the belly. You know, that sound shouldn't be something superficial, just coming from the lips or the throat. You make the sound from deep within your belly, from the Manipuraka, as it's called in yoga parlance. So you can evoke that awareness by reducing the pitch, the shruti at which you chant the Om, kind of reduce it a little bit, and then you will appreciate it better. So instead of saying Om, then the sound tends to come from the throat and the lips. Instead, make it a little more towards the bass side of your voice. You don't have to overdo it, but to whatever extent you can, reduce the shruti of the chant of Om and chant it more like when you do that, it's much easier to appreciate the origin of that Omkara from the very belly. Now what happens? There it is called the Akara. So, although the external chanting is Om, in your mind, in your understanding, you label that as the Akara sound coming from the belly. And then as you move on to Om, a little towards the end of your chant, the voice, as it were, the articulation, moves through the throat and then emerges out. And so your attention shifts gently from the belly upwards and towards the lips when you do the Makara sound. In this way, there are 3 matras, the Akara, Ukara, and Makara. And after the A, U, and Ma are chanted, meaning after you chant the Om, there is silence. That silence is also a form of that very nada. In other words, that silence is not a vacuum. It's not something that is just an absence of something. Instead, that is called the amatra. So Bhagavan says here that you have these 3 matras of A, U, and Ma in chanting Om, and there is Ardha Matra. This is just half a matra at the end of Om, where you actually have silence. And remember, silence is that from which the Om arises and that into which the Om resolves. Silence is not really only at the end of the Omkara chanting. The amazing thing here is that silence is that in which all sounds arise and resolve. This recognition is highlighted repeatedly by the Shastra, by the Acharyas. And Bhagavan is saying as much here. He goes on to say, the A stands for the waking state, the Vishwa, the Jiva, and the gross body. The U stands for the dream state, Taijasa, that is Jiva and the subtle body. And the M stands for the sleep state in which everything resolves, which is Prajna, which is Jiva with the causal body. And the Ardhamatra represents Turiya, which is the self or I nature. And what is beyond that is the Turiyatita. We will come to that in a minute. But the fourth state, which is the state of the I nature, the Ardhamatra, the silence in which the Omkara arises and falls, and that fourth state, which is the state of the I nature, was referred to in the section on dhyana, and which has been variously described as of the nature of amatra, which includes the three matras A, U, and M, as Maunakshara, as Ajapa, and as the Advaita mantra, which is the essence of all mantras such as Panchakshara. So the purport is simple, even if the English is involving fairly subtle ideas here. The idea is this, that in chanting Om, you're evoking all that exists. So that Omkara is a sound symbol which is loaded with sacred meaning. You evoke all that exists as just Omkara alone. Just as all that exists is just name and form. What is name? Name is just words, right? And for those words, they have certain meanings. So Omkara is loaded with the symbolism that it denotes all the three states of experience, all the three bodies, which is the subtle body, the causal body, and the waking state or the gross body. So just to give it in a brief for now, we can say that when you chant Om, you're actually invoking all that exists. Just stay with that simple idea for now, because that's what all this is about. And then when Om chanting ceases, that half matra is the silence from which all this arises. Silence, like I said, is not a vacuum here. It is that matrix, that base background from which the sound arises and sound falls. So you pay attention to that silence as well, because in that silence, there is direct appreciation of what I am. So when I chant Akara, well, I am chanting A. When I chant O, yeah, I am chanting O. When I am chanting Ma, okay, I am chanting Ma. When I am with the silence, I am the silence. Okay. So when you observe the silence, I am the silence. You recognize I am that silence in which everything is happening, coming and falling. So that recognition is what Bhagavan is talking here. Pay attention to the silence between the chants. In any mantra also, similar thing is true. If you are given to chanting any mantra, give a short pause between the chants, paying attention to the chant, that I am that silence in which this chanting is happening. That's very helpful because it takes you one step forward towards self-inquiry. And therefore, Bhagavan says, the essence of all the mantras such as Panchakshari are included in this Om chanting. So we will continue this discussion in the next. It is a very loaded and packed information here. So just remember this basic scheme here, that the 8 limbs of Patanjali are mapped onto self-inquiry. They're compatible with self-inquiry. Bhagavan therefore is encouraging us that you can do pranayama, you can do pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, but with the understanding of Vedanta, with the understanding of self-inquiry. Then they acquire a different, almost transformative character. Even otherwise, it's helpful, but it stops one step short of Advaita. If one practices the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali without any background of Bhagavan's teaching or Vedanta, which is the same thing. So if then we will not be able to have, not be able to arrive at Advaita. And so that is the crux of this entire question. So maybe we'll stop here and continue later. I wish all the students a very auspicious Durga Ashtami today. It's one of the most important days of the Sharan Navaratra festival. Today is Durga Ashtami. And I pray to Bhagavan that his blessings are on all of us on this auspicious day. And with this, I conclude this talk for today. If there are any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, we will end with the Shanti Mantra.
Sir, thank you so much for the session. We have got one comment and one question. So to your last bit, Sunandini ji is very happy that you are addressing all of us on the occasion of Durgashtami. And the question that we have is from Sushil Motwani ji. The question is, and I quote, Namaskar Raghav ji, would it be correct to directly go to dharana stage, or does it have to be done beginning with pranayama? Unquote.
Yes. So the question is, these 8 limbs, especially the higher later limbs, can we directly go to dharana, or we should do pranayama, pratyahara, dharana? Well, the first level answer is, if you are able to do dharana effectively in your own perception, then for sure you can do dharana directly. You don't necessarily have to do the earlier steps. That applies even to the later ones like dhyana. If you're able to directly go there, you might as well do that. Perfectly fine. So there's no harm in directly jumping there. And I only said that in general, have this as a tool. Doing pranayama is useful to have as a tool, but you can do directly dharana also. So we'll end this session with the Shanti mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vasishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om.
Raghavji, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Raghavji, for a very engaging session. And we shall, of course, meet you again next month. Thank you, sir. Narayananji, at the Kendra, I shall now request him to lead us through Akshar Manamalai and Arati. Sir.
அருணாச்சலவனுக்கேற்ற அக்ஷரமணமாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் மருளி காப்பாயே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் என்ற அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறறுப்பார் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் அகமும் தீயுற்று அமிதமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகமுகு தீர்த்தும் அகமுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்தலின் கொள் அருணாச்சலா ஆரும் காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி இனம் பழி திருவருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்படித்தம் உதையே நினைத்தாய் இனியான் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈட்டிடுமந்தை நெறிதரு புரிவோய் இதோ உனதருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா உடையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் குருவியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா கூட்டுற்று மூலம் வீடா குந்தை கண்டு அடங்கி உன்னழகை காட்டனாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திப்போ என்னை கலவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா. ஏதிந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலம். அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகுவோர் அகத்தில் இல்லையோ அருணாச்சலா. ஒருவன் முன்னை ஒளித்தவர் வருவார் உந்தூதே இது அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. ஓங்காரம் பொருள் உயர்வில்லை உதயார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா. அவ்வை போல எனக்கு அருளை தந்து ஆழ்வது கடந்தருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அக்ஷரமொழி மாலைவா. நண்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமொழி மாலை வாழி. ஓம் பூர்புவஸ்வः தத்சர்வவர்ணம் भर्गो देवश्री धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसंततिः अमृत स्वामी स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा माने स्वाहा ज्ञाने स्वाहा उदाने समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः उदगानंद विद्यं समर्पयामि विद्यमानियं समर्पयामि अमृतं समुद्राभुसं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम पूगीवर समाहितं नागवल्ली तनोरं कर्पूरपूरितं प्रतिदिनं कर्पूर नीराजनं श्रीरमणमहर्षिः समर्पयामि यो वां पुष्पं वेदा पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पद्मान् भवति महाभावा पुष्पम पुष्पम पुष्पवान प्रजावान पुष्पवान भवति ओम तत् ब्रह्मा ओम तत् वायु ओम तत् आत्मा ओम तत् सत्यम ओम तत् सर्वम ओम तत् पुरो नमः अंतर्गतभूते सत्वायां विश्वमुक्तिषु तम यज्ञत्तम पदकारत्तम इंद्रत्तम रुद्रत्तम विष्णुत्तम ब्रह्मत्तम पुजामि त्वं तदा ज्योतिर्गो ब्रह्मस्वरम न कर्मणा न प्रदयादने नित्याने एके अमृतत्व मानसु परेण नाहं पीतं भुवायं विप्राजते दत्यदयो विशन्ति वेदान्तं ज्ञानसे नित्यदाता संन्यास योगा तदय शुद्धतत्त्वा ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्तकाले परान्तकात्मरिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे कारं दिवावं परमेश्वरभूतं यत् पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्य सपुंसदं तत्रामित्तकरं दिशोगत् तस्मिन्नन्तद्वादित्यं यो वेदातो स्वरं प्रभुतो वेदान्तस्य प्रतिष्ठः तस्य प्रकृतिलीलस्य वर्तमहेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं समर्पयामि ॐ तत्सर्वब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु हरि ओं हरि ओं हरि ओं हरि ओं हरि ओं
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's Sunday Satsang with Raghavji. We shall meet Raghavji again next month. Namo Ramana. May Bhagwan bless us all. Namo Ramana.